I've been driving trucks for over 10 years now, but nothing could prepare me for the night that changed everything. You see, most people think the worst part of the job is the long hours, the endless stretches of lonely highways, or the shitty food at truck stops. But the real danger? It's the things you can't see coming. It was a dark, cold night when it all started. I was driving along Route 66, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound was the hum of my truck's engine. The radio had been dead for hours, and the moon hung high above, a pale ghost in the sky. I wasn't supposed to be out there this late, had a tight schedule to keep, but there I was, making good time, or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., something caught my eye in the distance. A dim light flickered like a weak flame, barely visible through the fog. It was a rest area, one I knew I'd passed hundreds of times, but tonight it felt different. Empty. Silent. I decided to pull in, stretch my legs, and grab a coffee. Couldn't hurt, right? My body ached from hours behind the wheel, and the lack of human contact was starting to get to me. As I rolled into the rest area, the silence hit me first. Not even the usual hum of the vending machines. I didn't think much of it at first, figuring it was just late and most truckers were likely asleep. But then, as I parked, I noticed something strange. There was another truck already parked in the corner, hidden in the shadow of the trees. It was an old, beat-up rig, the kind you don't see too often anymore. No one around, no lights, just the truck. I'm no rookie, but that truck put me on edge. Something about it didn't sit right. Still, I pushed it out of my mind. I grabbed my keys, locked the doors, and walked toward the building. That's when I heard it. A noise. A soft, faint scratching sound like nails on metal. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of that old truck. My heart skipped a beat. I turned, and for a split second, I thought I saw something moving in the shadows, but when I blinked, nothing was there. Maybe it was just the fog playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Shaking it off, I made my way to the rest area building. It was quiet inside, too quiet, except for the humming of the fluorescent lights. There wasn't a single soul around, just a couple of dirty tables, a few vending machines, and a bathroom in the back. Felt more like a ghost town than a rest stop. I grabbed a coffee, stared at the counter, and tried to forget the feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. Something was wrong. I knew it, but what? Could be anything. Just my nerves, right? But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door to the bathroom was wide open, and standing in the doorway, facing me, was a man. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest, like it was trying to break out. The man in the doorway didn't move, didn't even blink. He was tall, thin, and wearing a dark jacket that hung loosely from his shoulders. His face was pale, almost sickly looking, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. There was something off about him, something that felt wrong. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at him. I wanted to speak, to ask if he was okay, but the words caught in my throat. The silence between us stretched longer and longer, until I finally forced myself to take a step back. Then he moved. It wasn't a normal movement. It was slow, unnaturally slow, as if his body wasn't entirely in sync with the rest of him. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving mine, and took a step forward. I felt the air shift around me, like something heavy was pressing down. I should have turned and run. I knew that, but I didn't. I stood there, my feet cemented to the floor, as he finally spoke. His voice was a rasp, like he hadn't used it in years. "Are you lost?" The words were simple, but they hit me like a punch. I tried to speak, to say something, anything, but my voice betrayed me. My mind screamed to turn around and bolt, but my legs were paralyzed. "No, I'm not lost," I finally managed to mutter, though I had no idea why I said it. I wasn't sure what was going on, but something about this man's presence made everything feel wrong. The man's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes stayed cold, empty. "You're far from home," he said, stepping even closer. I could smell the sour stench of sweat and something worse, like rot. His breath was shallow, rasping with every exhale. I knew I needed to leave. I needed to get back to my truck and get out of there, but the man was blocking the door. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my body refused to listen. "Can I help you?" I forced the words out, my voice shaking. I had to keep my cool, had to get away from this guy somehow. He took another step forward. I could hear his feet shuffling on the floor, the sound too deliberate, too calculated. He looked down at my boots, then back up at me as if sizing me up. "No," he whispered, "but I can help you when the time comes." That was enough. My instincts kicked in. I shoved past him, my hands slamming against his chest as I stumbled toward the door. He didn't try to stop me. He just stood there watching me with that same empty stare. I didn't look back as I raced out the door, almost tripping over my own feet as I dashed toward my truck. The fog was still thick, wrapping around everything, making the world feel even more suffocating. I slammed the door of my truck shut and locked it in a panic. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to start the engine. But when it roared to life, I didn't hesitate. I threw the truck into gear and sped out of that rest area like the devil himself was chasing me. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I swear, I saw that man standing in the middle of the lot, watching me leave. And I knew then that he wasn't just some crazy drifter. There was something more to him, something far darker than I wanted to believe. The road stretched out ahead of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every mile I drove, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights in the distance. But nothing, just the empty, fog-filled road. It wasn't until I passed a small, flickering streetlight a few miles down the road that I felt it again. The same cold, oppressive feeling that had haunted me at that rest stop. I wasn't alone. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was just the paranoia, just the adrenaline, and that I'd calm down once I got a few more miles between me and that rest area. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see headlights, a shadow following me in the fog. But the road stayed empty, silent. Just me, my truck, and the endless stretch of asphalt. But the feeling didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger. It was about an hour later when it happened. A jolt. A sudden sharp bump that shook the truck. At first, I thought I'd hit something on the road. A deer, maybe, or a pothole. But when I looked at the dashboard, the oil pressure light was blinking. The truck sputtered for a second, then roared back to life, but now the engine sounded off. I pulled over, heart racing, and got out to inspect the damage. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't care. I was so focused on the truck, trying to figure out what was wrong. My flashlight swept across the tires, the engine, the undercarriage, looking for anything unusual. But nothing seemed out of place. No punctures, no leaks, no sign of damage. The truck was fine. It didn't make sense. My truck had been running smoothly for miles. What had caused the jolt? And then, just as I was about to climb back into the cab, I heard something. A rustling sound behind me, soft at first. My body froze. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the fog like a knife. At first, I didn't see anything. But the rustling came again, closer this time, like footsteps in the gravel. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I turned around, eyes scanning the darkness. Nothing. No figure. No movement. But then, just at the edge of the fog, I saw it. A shape. A figure standing still, barely visible in the mist. The same man. The one from the rest area. He was standing there, just outside the beam of my flashlight, watching me with those hollow eyes. I took a step back, my heart pounding. I couldn't breathe. "What the hell do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But the man didn't respond. He didn't move. He just stood there, a silhouette in the mist, as if waiting for something. I backed away slowly, toward my truck, every step a battle between my instincts and my paralyzed legs. I was about to turn and run when I heard his voice again, this time louder, clearer, cutting through the fog. "You'll be back." I didn't even think. I didn't even register what he'd said. I turned, sprinted back into the truck, and slammed the door shut behind me. My breath was coming in short gasps, my heart thudding in my chest. I looked in the rearview mirror again. There was nothing. I wasn't sure how far I drove before I dared to look again. The fog had thickened, wrapping around the truck like some kind of living thing. My headlights barely cut through it, and the road felt endless. It felt wrong. It felt like I was trapped in a loop, driving in circles. The feeling of being followed, watched, never left me. It lingered like a shadow, always at the edge of my vision. It wasn't until the radio crackled to life that I felt the full weight of my isolation. "Truck 74, come in." I jerked in surprise. The voice was distorted, barely audible over the static. My first thought was that it was some kind of radio glitch, but then the message came through again. "Truck 74, do you copy? We've been trying to reach you." I grabbed the mic, my hand trembling. "This is Truck 74. Who is this?" There was a long pause and then the voice came back, this time with a tone of urgency. "Listen, you need to turn back. Turn around. Get off that road." The transmission cut out. I didn't know who the hell that was, but I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the brakes and threw the truck into a sharp U-turn, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned the wheel. The road stretched on, endless and deserted. But as I looked at the fog, I saw something in the distance. Something that hadn't been there before. A shadow, darker than the fog itself, moving closer. It was coming for me. My hands were numb from gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I floored the gas pedal. The fog seemed to swallow the road ahead, thicker than before, like it was alive, twisting, crawling, pulling at the truck. The shadow I'd seen in the distance was growing, and as it crept closer, I could hear the sound of something following me. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, but not quite human. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The shadow was still there, just outside the reach of the headlights, but I knew it wasn't the fog. It was something else. The man. He was there again, moving with a deliberate slowness that made every nerve in my body scream to get away. I knew what he wanted. I could almost hear his voice in my head as though he was whispering directly into my mind, his words chilling and cold. "You'll be back." The words from earlier haunted me, gnawing at my thoughts like a promise. But I wasn't going to let it happen. I couldn't let it. I couldn't go back to that place. I had to outrun it. I had to survive. I hit the gas even harder, the engine roaring as I pushed the truck to its limits. The road ahead blurred, but it didn't matter. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, the weight of whatever was behind me growing heavier with every passing second. The radio crackled again, a desperate voice breaking through the static. "Truck 74, do you copy? You need to stop." I didn't even wait to hear the rest. I slammed the button on the mic and tossed it to the passenger seat. There was no time to explain. No time to figure out who was on the other end. The only thing I could focus on was the road and the horrifying feeling of being hunted. The fog seemed to close in even tighter, and the road grew narrower, as if it was pulling me deeper into its grasp. It was disorienting, like I was trapped in some nightmare, unable to wake up. Every mile I drove felt like I was moving in slow motion, the truck dragging itself through thickening mist. I glanced at the speedometer, 70 miles per hour, and it still felt like I was crawling. Then I saw it. Pair of headlights. They appeared suddenly, cutting through the fog behind me, closing the distance too quickly for comfort. At first, I thought it was another truck, maybe a fellow driver passing through the area. But when I checked the rearview mirror again, my stomach dropped. There was no truck. There was no vehicle. It was just the shape of the man, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. He was running fast, much faster than any human should be able to. His figure flickered in and out of the fog like a ghost, his long limbs stretching impossibly long with each stride. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, tires screeching as it fishtailed on the wet road, but I didn't care. I had to shake him off. I had to. The shadow lunged. I didn't see it coming. 1 second, he was just a blur, barely visible in the rearview. The next, he was right there, in front of my truck, his long fingers slamming against the windshield, leaving behind smears of dark, greasy fingerprints. His face was twisted with an unnatural grin, his mouth too wide, teeth too sharp, as if he hadn't been human in a long time. I screamed. I didn't know what to do. My instincts told me to go forward, to keep driving, but the terror in my chest had me frozen in place. I could see his eyes now cold, unblinking, and full of something I couldn't even describe. Something ancient. Something evil. The truck stalled. The engine sputtered and died as the man slammed his fists against the hood, and for a second everything went quiet. The fog, the shadow, even the sound of the truck, it all disappeared. All I could hear was the rapid beating of my own heart, the suffocating silence that surrounded me. And then he spoke. "Run." The word echoed in my mind, a command, a promise. And before I could even move, before I could even react, the man, no, the thing vanished into the fog. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't do anything but stare into the empty space where he had been. It was over. But something deep in my gut told me it wasn't. The road ahead was still covered in thick, swirling fog. The engine was dead. The headlights flickered once more, but I couldn't feel the engine running and I couldn't move. The door didn't open. I tried to scream. I tried to yell for help, but my voice didn't come. There was nothing but silence and the shadows stretching out longer than I had ever known. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the silence pressed down on me, suffocating. My hands were still frozen around the steering wheel, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man, or whatever he was, reappear in that fog, his twisted grin etched into my mind like a scar. Nothing. Just the thick, suffocating fog. The sound of my ragged breathing. The dead engine in front of me. I fumbled with the keys, trying to start the truck again, but my fingers were shaking so violently I could barely get a grip. The fog outside my window felt alive, shifting, curling, closing in like it had a mind of its own. And then I heard it. A faint, distant sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Maybe the trees rustling or some animal in the distance. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, the sound grew louder, sharper. A scratching. A scraping like fingernails on glass. It was coming from outside my truck. I glanced at the side mirror. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating white fog. I knew I shouldn't look, but my curiosity got the best of me. Slowly, I twisted the knob and cracked the window just enough to hear more clearly. The sound grew louder. It was unmistakable now. It was right there. Scratching. I twisted the mirror toward the dark corner of the lot, and then I saw it. The man's shadow. Not standing still this time. Not waiting. He was crawling on all fours, moving at a grotesque pace, his limbs too long, his body bent in unnatural angles, contorting in ways a human body never should. The skin of his hands scraped against the pavement as he came closer, his movements jerky and erratic, like he wasn't fully in control of himself. I slammed the window shut with a panic I couldn't suppress. I tried the engine again. It roared to life. Relief flooded through me. I put the truck in gear and floored the accelerator, speeding down the road as fast as I could. The fog seemed to part for a moment, as if it was giving way to my desperation. But when I looked back in the rearview mirror, my stomach twisted. The man was following, crawling, fast and relentless, his hands dragging across the road, his twisted face emerging from the fog like a nightmare come to life. I could hear him now, too, his raspy breath, wheezing in the night air, chasing me like a predator. I pushed the truck harder, faster. The headlights cut through the mist, but I still couldn't see the road clearly. I had no idea where I was. The trees were blurring past, the landscape unrecognizable. The road was an endless, winding stretch that seemed to go on forever. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The truck shuddered, then came to a screeching halt. The engine cut out. I cursed, slamming my hands against the wheel in frustration. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I stared at the dashboard. The engine had just shut off. It was as if something or someone had deliberately stopped me. I tried the keys again. Nothing. That's when I saw it. The fog had thickened once more, but now something was different. It was moving, like it was swirling around the truck, gathering, forming a shape. And as I stared at the fog, I saw something emerge from it. It wasn't the man this time. It was worse. A figure much larger, much darker. A shape that seemed to swallow the light. It was coming toward me, slowly, but with purpose. It was tall, too tall. Its arms stretched long, impossibly long, and its head was cocked at a strange angle, as if it were observing me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place. And then, I heard it. Just one word, spoken with a coldness that made my blood run ice. Run. That voice. It wasn't the man's. It wasn't the same thing. It was deeper, darker, a voice that rattled my bones. And then the darkness exploded. The truck shook violently as something slammed against it. The force of it nearly knocked me out of my seat. I screamed, throwing myself backward, but the truck didn't move. It was as if the whole world was closing in on me. I grabbed the door handle, flung it open, and bolted out of the truck without a second thought. My feet hit the pavement and I ran. I didn't look back. Couldn't. The cold night air burned in my lungs, but I kept running, the sound of something large and heavy crashing behind me, right on my heels. I don't know how far I ran, but eventually, the sound stopped. The footsteps, the noise, the feeling of being chased. And that's when I collapsed. On my hands and knees, I gasped for air. My heart felt like it was going to explode. My body was exhausted, my muscles aching from the adrenaline. I lay there in the dirt, staring into the fog, not sure what had just happened, or if I was even safe. The silence around me was suffocating, but that's when I heard it. A whisper. Soft. So soft I almost didn't catch it. "You're still here?" The whisper lingered in the air, soft and eerie, just barely audible above the pounding of my heart. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. The words, they felt like they were spoken directly into my mind, like they were crawling beneath my skin. I tried to ignore it. I tried to push myself up to get away, but my body refused to respond. The fear, the exhaustion, it had taken everything out of me. The fog was thicker now, swirling around me like it was alive, crawling over my skin, seeping into my lungs. And that whisper. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus, distant and distorted, echoing from all directions. "You're still here? You're still here?" I turned my head slowly, desperate to make sense of it all. That's when I saw it, something massive, shifting just beyond the edge of the fog. It was tall, too tall. It stood there, completely still, like a mountain looming over me. I couldn't make out the details at first. It was too dark, the fog too thick. But then I saw movement. Something huge, monstrous, shifting beneath the surface of the mist. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was closer. A massive arm, impossibly long, stretching out from the fog toward me. It was covered in dark, wet skin, like something from a nightmare. It reached out with fingers that looked like they belonged to something inhuman, and they were coming for me. I tried to move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my body shaking uncontrollably. But it didn't matter. The thing was coming. It was too fast. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling in the dark, but it was too late. The massive arm shot forward, wrapping around me like a vice. Its grip was unyielding, cold as ice, and when it squeezed, I felt my ribs creak under the pressure. I gasped for air, my vision blurring as I was dragged toward the center of the fog. I tried to scream, tried to kick, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed with terror, my lungs burning as I fought for air. The fog was suffocating me, pressing in from every side, and that voice, the same whisper, now louder, clearer, was surrounding me, filling my mind. "You're still here. You can't escape." The grip tightened. I felt the weight of something ancient, something powerful, bearing down on me. I tried to focus, tried to think, but my thoughts were spinning, drowning in a sea of fear. My chest ached. My head felt like it was going to explode. And then I heard something else. A sound that cut through the fog, a familiar sound. The roar of an engine. A truck. The sound grew louder, coming closer, but it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from somewhere inside the fog. I twisted my head toward the noise, desperate, gasping for any kind of hope. Through the dense mist, I saw headlights. Distant at first, but they were moving toward me, cutting through the fog like a beacon. I didn't care who it was, I didn't care what was happening. All I knew was that I had to get to those lights. I fought against the grip that held me, kicking and thrashing with everything I had left. The thing's arm loosened, just enough for me to twist out of its grasp. I hit the ground hard, my body crashing into the dirt. Pain shot through me, but I didn't stop. I pushed myself up, my legs weak, my body numb, and I ran toward the light. The truck. It was coming closer, and I could see it now, a massive rig, its lights blinding in the dark. But as it approached, something felt off. There was no one in the driver's seat. It was empty. The truck was moving on its own, as if some unseen force was controlling it. I didn't care. I ran faster. The truck reached me, and as it passed, I reached out, grabbing onto the side, my fingers slipping as I struggled to pull myself up. And then the voice came again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. "You'll never escape." I don't remember how I got into the truck. Maybe I climbed through the passenger window. Maybe I stumbled into the cab. All I know is that I was in, and the truck was moving, driving me away from the fog, away from whatever that thing was. I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see it. But the fog was gone. The mist had lifted. There was nothing but the empty road behind me. I leaned back in the seat, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't over. It would never be over. The thing was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting, and it would find me again. The truck barreled down the highway, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel anything anymore. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me numb, drained. The road stretched out before me, but no matter how fast I drove, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that hellish fog, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, somewhere, just beyond the horizon. The empty truck cabin felt colder now, the silence pressing down on me. I glanced at the dashboard. The lights flickered in a pattern I didn't recognize, like they were malfunctioning. But I knew better. It wasn't a malfunction. It was something else. I looked out the side window, the world rushing by in a blur. The fog. That damn fog. It had been inescapable, consuming, and somehow I knew it was only a matter of time before it would return. It would always return. A flicker in the rearview mirror caught my eye. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see it. But I couldn't help myself. My eyes darted toward the mirror, and my blood froze. The fog was back. It was rolling in from behind me, thick, heavy, swallowing everything in its path. My hands clenched the wheel, my knuckles pale against the worn leather. I couldn't outrun it. I knew that. The road was endless. The night was endless. The fog surged forward, faster now, as if it were chasing me. But it wasn't just fog anymore. No, it was something worse. It was alive. I felt it before I saw it. The air grew colder. A chill ran down my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel its presence closing in, creeping up behind me. The truck's headlights flickered again, like they were fighting to stay on. And then the voice came, louder this time, cutting through the air like a knife. You can't outrun me. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a shout. It was deep, echoing in my skull, vibrating the bones in my body. I slammed my foot down on the gas, but the truck barely picked up speed. It was like the road was holding me back, like the world itself was conspiring to trap me in that fog. The shadows at the edge of my vision twisted and writhed, moving as if they had minds of their own. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The figure was there. The man. Or whatever he was. But this time he was no longer crawling. He was standing, tall and menacing, the fog swirling around him like a shroud. His face was twisted, his eyes, dark pits that seemed to swallow the light. His mouth stretched open impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, razor-sharp teeth. He was smiling. I turned away, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't know what to do. There was nowhere to go. No escape. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare and there was no waking up. I was losing my grip. Then, as if to seal my fate, the truck's engine sputtered. The lights went out. Everything went dark. For a moment, there was complete silence, and I thought for a split second that it was over. But then the fog reached me. It poured over the truck, thick and suffocating, like it was swallowing everything in its path. I opened the door, desperate, but my legs felt like jelly. I stumbled out of the cab, and the instant my feet hit the ground, I felt the cold, the unnatural cold that seeped into my bones, numbing me. And then I heard it again. The voice, low and guttural, vibrating through the air. You're not leaving. I tried to move, tried to run, but the fog was everywhere now. It wrapped around me, pulling me down, suffocating me. Couldn't breathe, couldn't see. It was like I was being consumed, like the world was closing in around me. I fell to my knees, my hands sinking into the dirt. The last thing I saw was the shape of the man, towering above me, his eyes glowing, his grin widening. And then, as everything went black, I heard the final words whispered in my ear. You'll never leave. You'll never escape.